I recently saw an interesting post and conversation about rural versus urban or city and what's happening to rural America. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea about when I say, will you dare to stay human? Will you fall in love with being human? What's the difference between an urban and a city and a rural take on that? Is there a difference? Well, I wanted to do that. I never do briefly, but we'll do that on the other side. So here's a few pictures and I will see you over there. So just a little background. My name is Jill. I grew up in the suburbs. I spent some time living in the mountains, which was kind of my first foray into a rural type of life. I couldn't see my immediate neighbors, to living now out in the middle of nowhere in the center of New Mexico on a cow farm. And it's been about 8 years now that I have lived in a small town and small towns. I did traveling the first couple of years, and also been introduced to a truly rural lifestyle. And it's been extremely profound for me in terms of how different. Now, this isn't a right or wrong discussion, it's just a discussion. And so the reason I'm even asking that question is I think one of the things facing humanity right now is not past tense, currently is this decision about whether we will decide to stay human. And the more urban you are, I think the more difficult that decision is going to be. And one of the reasons I live out in the middle of nowhere is to stay holding on to my humanity and nature for as long as I can. But something very profound happened to me when I moved out here. And, you know, I've worked with it's been over 25 years I've been working as a social worker and a therapist. And, you know, I started off with the psychology and the behavior, and then I got into brain chemistry and food and nutrition and all those things now that we talk about our physical, mental, and emotional health. But the missing piece that I did not even have any clue about were the basic human habits of being outside, putting your feet on the ground, being exposed to the animals, the rhythms of nature, the elements, shifting from controlling everything around me so that I get to do what I want, to understanding the elements that I live in and having to adjust to them. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how far away from our core human habits we have truly moved. And what I didn't understand then was what a profound change that would have on me. I knew that, you know, when we talk about things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, things like that, you know, the nervous system and some of these supporting systems were important. But until I actually got full-time, basically, I call it living in the dirt, but full-time exposure to the elements and nature and a different rhythm, I did not realize what a profound change that would be. And that was really what got me going on this whole stay human idea, because here's the big secret. We have everything we need within us. We keep trying to look to what we need to go get so we feel better, or we're not depressed, or we sleep better. When the reality is that our body is perfectly designed with this blueprint to create just a very high degree of health, happiness, and well-being. And everything about our current lifestyle is in opposition to that. And so as our rural economies and our land structures and all these things out here are getting destroyed because there's this push to move us, you know, into the city model, it's so much more powerful than city versus rural. The real question is quality of life and this disassociation with what it means to be human. Because the other thing that I got to experience is I've lived with all kinds of livestock, with goats, with sheep, with cows, with horses. I don't think I've lived with pigs, rabbits, rats, mice, wolves, rattlesnakes, everything. Coyotes, not wolves. And it's been profound to teach me the difference between domesticated and wild. And that's the real conversation. It's not rural versus city. It's what is the difference between domestication and wild. And we don't talk about wild in terms of our humanness. We talk about animals and we talk about nature, but we never really have this conversation about wild other than kind of this silly, dressing up and pretending like we're ancestral, to being out of control. That kid is wild. But we don't talk about what does it mean to be an undomesticated human. And that conversation is a conversation of degree, not absolutes. And that has been my process to figure out how wild I can go and still function within the parameters of civilization. I don't want to, never take a bath or that kind of thing, although that is a challenge. But to me, that's the more important question, is not city versus rural. It's wild versus domesticated. And I divide that two ways. The domesticated animal is completely dependent on its food, on its survival, on its comfort. Everything is dependent on the person who's taking care of it. The wild animal doesn't have anybody to depend on but itself and its tribe and nature. Now, what happens is we tell ourselves that the domesticated animal is happy and comfortable, and the wild animal is suffering. What I've learned is that there's discomfort with both groups, both the domesticated and the wild. The difference is that the wild has infinitely more control over the long term and big picture. The domesticated has none. And as I've lived with all these different animals, I have been struck by how domesticated we as humans are, and how humiliated we would be if we really understood the degree of our domestication. And we don't, because our system is still allowing us the luxury of food and shelter, some people. But it's a really important question. So when I say dare to stay human, it is very daring. It takes tremendous courage and bravery and commitment and discipline to want to understand what the wild essence of ourselves as humans are. But the big secret behind that is that is where the sense of happiness, health, and well-being lie, not in our domestication, but in that part of us, that blueprint, that design, that we have everything. We just have to do the work to activate it and to keep it active. And that, to me, is the real conversation. So I just wanted to bring that up, give you a little bit of food for thought, that no matter what's going on out in the world, you have everything that you need. The only question we all have to ask ourselves is, do we want it, and will we do the work? If the answer is yes, links are below. And thank you for spending time with me wherever you are, in the city or the country. And with that, we'll take a deep breath, and I will see you next time.